Everybody, Anthony here from Crazy Tech Lab. I hope you are all doing okay out there in these crazy times, because it is pretty crazy at the moment, isn't it? Certainly here in the UK, but we're soldering on. Hopefully going to get out the other side of all this craziness soon. But in the meantime, allow me to entertain you, because I have a great MINI-ITX build here for you today. We will be looking and reviewing the Kolink Rocket V2, which is one of the company's newest MINI-ITX cases. They've got a few out there. The original Rocket was a reasonable case, but it was quite limited in terms of cooling. Didn't have that many fan mounts. They've improved things somewhat with the Rocket V2, but as you'll see later on, it still has some shortcomings as far as beefing up that cooling goes and using custom liquid cooling or even AIO liquid coolers. So I'm going to be seeing just what kind of a crazy PC I will be building inside this case, and the hardware that I'll be using to build it is the awesome Gigabyte Aorus X570i Aorus Pro Wi-Fi. So that's one of the only or very few MINI-ITX X570 based motherboards around at the moment. So still no new high-end chipsets from AMD. So you've got B550 as well, which is a little bit cheaper, but we don't really know when AMD is going to release a new high-end chipset. But to be honest, X570 does pretty much everything we need for it to do at the moment, doesn't it? Apart from maybe, you know, widespread Thunderbolt support or something. I don't know. But anyway, so that's the motherboard we're going to be using, and also, because I like to dial up the gaming prowess, frame rates, and the heat probably as well, we are going to be using an RTX 3090 graphics card in this case. So it's also not a very particularly small version of the RTX 3090. It is the Palit GameRock GeForce RTX 3090, which has an absolutely massive RGB heatsink, or RGB shroud, should I say, with a massive heatsink underneath with 3 fans. Just about fits into the Kolink Rocket. It doesn't fit into a lot of other MINI-ITX cases, such as the NZX TH1 and a few others, but it does fit in here just. So we're going to be seeing what the thermals are like, and if they're not acceptable as standard, whether a bit of undervolting can help to see to improve those thermals, and see if you can actually build a high-end or extremely high-end PC build in this case as well. And yeah, so stick around, check it out. We're going to be building an awesome PC, and also reviewing the Kolink Rocket to see if it's worth the cash. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel as well, and like this video if you find it informative and entertaining, and don't forget to turn on notifications if you want to be notified of me uploading new videos, because I will be uploading a few more over the next few weeks that will be super interesting. So do subscribe and show your support, it means a lot. So let's crack on with the video.
Okay, so I just thought I'd run through some of the hardware that I'm actually using in these systems. So we've got a Ryzen 5 5600X, which is AMD's brand new 6-core, 12-thread, 7nm Zen 3 processor, and we're also using the 92mm Alphacool Eisbaer LT, which has, as you can see, a 92mm all-in-one liquid cooler radiator in the top there with a 92mm Be Quiet fan as well. So obviously not many cases where you'll be limited by this, but for some reason Kolink seems to have had like a semi sort of going arrangement with Alphacool to actually produce something in this case. But really, in 2021 or even 2020, what Kolink should have been doing is putting a 240mm radiator in the roof here, and there isn't really any reason why it can't have done that, because there's plenty of room down there, as you can see, to move the motherboard down a bit and then push the riser cable down to give you a couple of inches up the top to fit a 120mm radiator and a couple of 120mm fans. So what we have is a case that's pretty limited in terms of cooling potential. So as you can see, the CPU cooler height limit is very, very severe, and I've even had to opt for low profile memory just to try and route those tubes over to the radiator over on the other side. So it's not an ideal setup, if I'm honest. You're also limited to SFX power supplies, but that's kind of what you'd expect in a case of this size. And the only kind of good thing about it really is that the flow-through fans on most RTX cards, they are actually allowed to breathe. So they aren't just dumping the air onto the motherboard tray like they do in the NZX TH1. But here, as you can see, there is a small gap, albeit slightly blocked by the power supply, but there's a good few inches of clearance above that cooler down there. I'm pretty sure you can see that just through the cables. So it's not ideal, as in like you see in a couple of other cases like the Cooler Master NR200P. There are some much better orientations for RTX cards with flow-through fans in that case, but here it's not as horrendous as it could be. So that might lead to some slightly better than expected GPU thermals along with the vented side panels. So the Corsair 750 watt platinum SFX power supply, obviously plenty of room in here. Again, a small issue with the cables because you can only kind of route the power supply this way, and they do come very, very close to the fans. So what you'll have to do is employ your ninja cable tidying skills, and I've just whacked some black cable ties on there just to bunch them all together and to pull them away from that fan in the roof, and that seems to have done a pretty good job. And I've done the same with the tubing cables down here. They've kind of pushed out a bit now, but they do sort of sit flush with the case quite easily down there, as you can see. So I've just whacked a couple of cable ties on them just to tidy things up a bit. So the actual pump, reasonably powerful. It's not on par with custom liquid cooling pumps, but it's more than enough to deal with this build. You can control it through the 3-pin fan header, which you can see down there. I've just connected that up, and the tubes do actually, the actual fittings on the tubes, angled barbs there, and I believe they are G1 1/4-inch fittings as well. So you can actually swap this pump out for something else. I don't know whether it would cope with a GPU water block as well in the loop, but it's maybe worth a go for some of you that are looking for a combined pump and water block. But yeah, they do flip around. So if you've got a slightly different setup, it's maybe worth a look. But really, I can't think of too many uses where you'd actually use this all-in-one liquid cooler, given that a 120mm liquid cooler is always going to perform much better. A 240mm one is even more preferable. So unless you've got a Kolink Rocket V2 where you are limited by that 90mm fan mount in the roof, then I can't really see too many reasons to buy one. So another issue with the case is that the clearance between the top panel where the fan and radiator are mounted and this kind of unibody exterior here is less than a centimetre. So the problem with that is that while it looks pretty swish, you've got no external fan vents. It's a super clean finish and mostly pretty well finished for the most part. that gap there is really not great for cooling. It's barely enough gap to get the air out in the first place, but the air is having to bend around at 90 degrees immediately, and it's just not going to be great for airflow. So it remains to be seen how well this cooler deals with the Ryzen 5 5600X and whether it is hampered by that roof vent there. So now there is another fan vent down at the bottom. It's super dark and claustrophobic down there, but it might just be possible to get a slim 180mm fan down there. It is very, very tight, but that's possibly doable. So that's pretty much it from this side of the case. So let's flip it up and check around the other side. And this side obviously dominated by the Palit RTX 3090, and it's a absolutely monster card, but it does fit in here with an inch or two to spare, in fact. So the case is certainly able to hold very, very large GPUs, and there's no real reason why you wouldn't want to. And there's a big vent on the side panel, which I'll just grab from over behind us here. So as you can see, the side panel just sits on there like that. So you've got a great vented side panel that spans the entire width of the graphics card pretty much, and that's pretty good in terms of getting cool air into the case. In terms of getting it out, well, you can obviously vent some out the rear. This card does do that, but a lot of it is going to be dumped back into the case. So again, you're going to be relying a lot on the power supply and on the roof fan, which is of course tied to the all-in-one liquid cooler. So the graphics card is probably going to be the coolest running component in this case, because it's just drawing air straight in through the side panel. But the problem you've got is that you've just got a single 92mm fan dealing with the CPU and a lot of the heat from the graphics card. So I imagine the case temperature is going to suffer and the processor temperature is going to suffer as well. So again, it's a pretty reasonable case. Other than that, if you're building a less power-hungry system, but for high-end systems, obviously we've got some severe concerns over the cooling. And to be honest, I would much rather have seen a few design tweaks, and so we get a 240mm radiator mount in the roof or the base of the case, like is kind of the going rate with a lot of similar size small form factor cases at the moment. So Kolink kind of missed a trick on that one with this case, I think. And anyway, let's press on with the thermal testing.
Okay, so we have a peak GPU frequency of 2040 megahertz. That's the peak boost frequency at stock speed, and the GPU temperature hit a maximum of 76 degrees. So we'll be trying to improve on that temperature while keeping the GPU boost frequency the same. And if we just scroll down to the bottom here, we'll see the max voltage, the max GPU core voltage was actually 1.08 volts. So what we'll be trying to do is to lower that as much as we can to just try and reduce the heat load produced by the graphics card and improve the cooling overall in the case. And we will be doing the same for the CPU as well. So let's take a look and see what we can do.
So there are a couple of ways that you can fine-tune your RTX 3000 series graphics card, and indeed most graphics cards out there. One is by using the power limit, and the other is to go a little bit more granular and tweak the voltage and frequency curves. So I've played with both things in the past and tweaked both things here, but by far and away the quickest and easiest way of doing this was just to simply reduce the power limit of the graphics card to 80%. And this saw the peak voltage fall from 1.08 volts to 0.986 volts, so a substantial decrease there. And that also saw the noise level fall from 47 decibels to 46 decibels. Now, don't forget, the decibel scale is not linear, so that's actually a significant drop in noise levels, and it was noticeable as well. The GPU temperature, by reducing the power limit, fell from 75 degrees C, which is actually reasonable, all the way down to 69 degrees C, which is pretty good considering I haven't actually reduced the peak frequency here. The peak frequency boost remained at around 2040 megahertz. So finally then, the CPU temperature, actually the biggest drop here, the peak CPU temperature falling from 88 degrees C to 79 degrees C, and that kind of proves my theory that this radiator with that single 92mm fan really is at the mercy of the GPU thermals, the heat produced by the graphics card. So any reduction in the heat produced by the graphics card is going to improve things for the CPU as well. So definite gains here then to be had across the board by cutting that power limit, and the performance in Metro Exodus, I just saw a 1 frames per second drop across the board in the minimum and 99th percentiles, the minimum and average 99th percentiles, sorry. So very, very little, unnoticeable drop in performance for some significant drops in thermals and noise.
So what do we make of the Kolink Rocket V2 then? Well, I think it's fair to say that Kolink has taken its eye off the ball in more than one area of this case. I think the room inside hasn't been particularly well used, or efficiently used, should I say. The space for a 240mm radiator in the roof should absolutely have been used, and is absolutely possible to fit something like that in the roof there with some very minor modifications. And why they've limited themselves to a 92mm fan mount is kind of beyond me, really. I did see a press release a while back that linked the Kolink Rocket V2 with the Alphacool 92mm liquid cooler, and I thought at the time that it's kind of, I can understand that if a case was so unique that it only had 92mm fan mounts, but some kind of crazy small version of the NZXT-H1, for example. But with the Kolink Rocket V2, that just isn't the case. It's almost like they've gone out of their way to use a 92mm fan mount in this case, and that just doesn't make any sense at all. So there is basically very, very limited in terms of the cooling potential, both in terms of adding airflow through fans and also expanding it a little further with 240mm liquid coolers, whether you go for an AIO or somehow fit a custom loop in there. It's further hampered by the fact that you've got this tiny slit at the top to actually route the air out of the case, so it's a very tiny gap to start with, and you're also forcing the air out at 90 degrees, which is never a good idea. So what's basically happening with just a single 92mm fan in here, and there's no room for anything else in the roof anyway, there is a small gap in the bottom that you might be able to squeeze a slim 80mm fan, but that's not really going to help things. Or at least improve things significantly. You've basically got graphics cards like this monster here that are dumping nearly all of their airflow into the case, and you're relying on a single 92mm fan to deal with that and the heat from the processor, and that's just not good enough, really. So basically what I'd like to see is this case refined. Kolink does have a slightly more modern but very, very different version of the case. I can't even remember what it's called now, but it seems to be a bit more in line of what we're looking for. So I have requested it from Kolink. I'm just waiting for a reply from them to see if they will send it over to me, and I will of course take a look. But for now, I think I'd recommend you steer clear of the Rocket V2, unless for some reason you like me are taken with its design. I mean, when you walk in the room and you see it and you see all the hardware that I've crammed inside, it's like, wow, that's a great looking case. But when you actually look at how efficiently the internal space has been used, it's very disappointing. So
that is pretty much it from me on this case. If you do like the look of it, then I'd maybe stick to as big low profile fan as you can fit in here. And graphics card wise, then yeah, you can fit pretty much anything you want in here. The thermals aren't too terrible. But the all-in-one liquid cooler just doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think there are probably some low-profile air coolers that you could fit inside this case that would have a better surface area with that. So I'd like to thank Kolink and everyone else that's contributed to the hardware in this build for sending it all over. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Got some great videos coming up. And also don't forget to turn on those notifications and like this video as well. And I will see you soon.